They called her a charity case. They whispered that she was a waitress who got lucky, a nobody who had snagged a billionaire and was now about to be discarded like last season's fashion line. In the ruthless arena of the Manhattan Superior Court, you do not represent yourself against a shark like Marcus Sterling. Not when he is the CEO of Sterling Global, and certainly not when he has hired Silas Blackwood, a defense attorney so vicious he is known in the city as the Butcher. Everyone in courtroom 42 expected a slaughter. They expected Elena Sterling to cry, sign the pitiful settlement papers, and vanish back into the poverty from which she came. Marcus certainly did. He even laughed out loud when she stood up from her empty table. But he forgot one crucial detail. The person who builds the house isn't the one who lives in it. It's the one who holds the deed. And Marcus Sterling was about to learn that while he played the role of the king, he was living in a castle his wife had secretly bought 3 years ago. What happened over the next hour didn't just silence his laughter, it froze the blood in his veins and exposed a secret identity that would shatter the entire business world. This is the story of the wife who played the fool, only to reveal she owned the game. The laughter wasn't subtle. It was a rich, arrogant sound that bounced off the mahogany walls of the courtroom. It was the sound of a man who believed he was untouchable. Marcus Sterling leaned back in his Italian leather chair, smoothing the lapel of a charcoal suit that cost more than most people earn in a year. He turned to his attorney and whispered loud enough for the front row to hear. "Look at her, Silas. She's wearing that dress from Target. It's pathetic. She actually thinks she has a chance." Silas Blackwood, a man with silver hair and eyes like chipped flint, didn't laugh. He just smirked, tapping his gold fountain pen against the heavy oak table. "Let her play pretend, Marcus. It makes the kill easier. Judge Henderson hates amateurs. She'll be destroyed before the lunch recess." Across the aisle, at the plaintiff's table, sat Elena Sterling. To the gallery of spectators, she looked small. The courtroom air conditioning was blasting, and she shivered slightly. Unlike the defense table, which was cluttered with paralegals, laptops, and stacks of leather-bound evidence, Elena's table was starkly empty. There was no lawyer whispering in her ear. There were no assistants. Just a single yellow legal pad, a plastic cup of water, and a cheap black USB drive resting near her hand. She kept her head down, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, sensible bun. To the casual observer, she looked like a defeated woman, a housewife who had been traded in for a newer model, specifically Marcus's 24-year-old personal assistant, Tiffany, who was currently sitting in the back row, scrolling on her phone with a bored expression. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Heavy door behind the bench swung open, and the Honorable Judge William P. Henderson swept into the room. Henderson was an old-school jurist, known for his zero-tolerance policy regarding theatrics and time-wasting. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked down at the docket with a frown. "Case number 49-2024, Sterling versus Sterling," Judge Henderson grumbled, his voice gravelly. "We are here for the final hearing on asset division and the dissolution of marriage. Appearances?" Silas Blackwood stood up smoothly, buttoning his jacket with a practiced motion. "Silas Blackwood, representing the respondent, Mr. Marcus Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global, Your Honor." The judge nodded and looked to the other table. "And for the petitioner?" Elena stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh noise in the quiet room. Marcus chuckled again, covering his mouth with a well-manicured hand. "Elena Sterling, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was soft, trembling just enough to sell the performance. "Representing myself." Judge Henderson peered over his spectacles. He sighed, a long, weary exhale that signaled he was already regretting this trial. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm going to ask you this once, and I want you to listen carefully. Your husband manages a global logistics empire. The marital assets in question are estimated in the hundreds of millions. Mr. Blackwood here has been practicing corporate law for 30 years. Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed pro se? You are bringing a plastic knife to a nuclear war, madam." I can't afford an attorney, Your Honor," Elena said, looking down at her hands. "Mr. Sterling froze my access to the joint accounts 6 months ago. I barely have enough for rent." Silas Blackwood shot up instantly. "Objection! Your Honor, Mr. Sterling merely secured the assets to prevent frivolous spending by an unstable partner. We offered Mrs. Sterling a generous settlement of $100,000 to cover her transition. She refused it out of pure spite." $100,000? The judge raised an eyebrow. "For an estate of this size, that seems lean." Silas smoothed his tie. "It is more than she came into the marriage with, Your Honor. She was a waitress at a diner when they met. She has no financial literacy. She has no contribution to the success of Sterling Global. We are simply trying to protect the company from her greed." "I see," the judge said. He looked at Elena with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Mrs. Sterling, I strongly advise you to reconsider the settlement. If you proceed, I will hold you to the same standards as a practicing attorney. I will not hold your hand. If you fail to object, evidence gets in. If you fail to file the right motions, you lose. Do you understand?" Elena looked up. For a split second, the fear in her eyes seemed to vanish, replaced by something colder, something harder, like steel beneath velvet. But it was gone so fast, Marcus missed it.
"I understand, Your Honor," she said. "I'm ready."
Marcus leaned over to Silas, grinning. "Watch this. She's gonna cry in 10 minutes. This is gonna be the easiest victory of your career." Judge Henderson banged his gavel lightly. "Mr. Blackwood, your opening statement. Keep it brief." Silas Blackwood walked to the center of the room. He didn't use notes. He was a performer, and the courtroom was his stage. "Your Honor," Silas began, his voice baritone and trustworthy. "This case is simple. It is a tragedy, yes, but a simple one. Marcus Sterling is a visionary. He built Sterling Global from a garage startup into a billion-dollar titan. He worked 18-hour days. He missed holidays. He sacrificed everything for the success of the empire. And what did his wife do?" Silas gestured accusingly at Elena. "She stayed home. She attended charity luncheons to boost her own social status. She spent his money on clothes and jewelry. And now that the marriage has unfortunately broken down due to her erratic behavior, she wants half. She wants to dismantle a company that employs thousands of people just to fund a lifestyle she did nothing to earn. We will prove that a prenuptial agreement exists, one that she claims to have lost, and that her contributions to the marriage were negligible. We ask the court to limit support to the statutory minimum and grant Mr. Sterling full retention of the company shares." He sat down. It was a strong, standard opening. It painted Marcus as the hard-working American hero and Elena as the parasitic leech. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, "your opening statement." Elena walked around the table. She didn't go to the podium. She stood awkwardly in the middle of the aisle, holding her yellow notepad against her chest like a shield. "My husband, Marcus," she started, her voice shaking. "He says I did nothing. He says I was just a waitress. That is true. I was a waitress at the Blue Diner on 4th Street when we met 10 years ago." Marcus rolled his eyes. Here comes the sob story, he thought. She's going to talk about love and betrayal. Pathetic. But Elena continued, taking a deep breath. "The law in this state speaks of a partnership. It speaks of good faith. Marcus is asking you to believe that he built Sterling Global alone. He is asking you to believe that the initial capital, the $5 million that saved the company from bankruptcy in 2018, came from an anonymous angel investor in the Cayman Islands." The room went dead silent. Silas Blackwood's head snapped up. Marcus froze. "The what investor?" Judge Henderson asked, leaning forward. "The angel investor, Your Honor," Elena said, her voice stabilizing. "Specifically, a holding company registered as Nemesis Ventures in Zurich." Marcus's face went from smug to purple in the span of 3 seconds. He slammed his hand on the table. "That's confidential corporate information. How does she know that?" "Mr. Sterling, sit down," the judge barked. He turned his gaze to Elena. The pity was gone, replaced by sharp interest. "Mrs. Sterling, alleging knowledge of confidential investors is one thing, but what is your point?" "My point, Your Honor," Elena said, walking back to her table and picking up a single document, "is that Marcus thinks he owns Sterling Global because his name is on the door, but he doesn't know who owns the debt." She handed a paper to the bailiff. "Marked as Exhibit A," she said softly. Silas Blackwood snatched the copy from the bailiff. His eyes scanned the page. It was a notarized document from the Swiss registry. This is just a registration form," Silas scoffed, though his hands were trembling slightly. "It proves nothing." "Read the bottom line, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said. "The line listed under beneficial owner." Silas looked. His eyes widened. He looked at Marcus, then back at the paper. "It says Elena Russo." Marcus snatched the paper from his lawyer. "Elena Russo? That's your maiden name," he whispered, horrified. You don't have $5 million. You barely have $5. This is a forgery." "Is it?" Elena sat back down. She looked at Marcus, and for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just closed the cage door. "I suggest you call your chief financial officer, Marcus. Ask him where the monthly interest payments for the startup loan have been going for the last 5 years. They haven't been going to Zurich. They've been going to a trust fund in my name." "Call your first witness, Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave. detective, and you better hope your client hasn't been lying to the court about his financials. The air in the courtroom had shifted violently. It was no longer a slaughter. It was an ambush. Silas Blackwood was a seasoned veteran, though. He knew how to recover. He shoved the paper into his briefcase, dismissing it as a trick. "I call Mr. Anthony Rossi to the stand," Silas announced. Anthony Rossi was Marcus's CFO, a man with a nervous twitch and a suit that cost more than Elena's first car. He took the oath. "Mr. Rossi," Silas began, pacing, "you manage the finances for Sterling Global, correct?" "I do," Rossi said. "Are you familiar with the plaintiff's claims regarding Nemesis Ventures or her supposed ownership of the debt?" "I have never seen Mrs. Sterling involved in any high-level finance," Rossi lied smoothly. "Our books are audited annually. The angel investor is a Swiss consortium. Mrs. Sterling is likely confusing standard terminology with whatever fantasy she has cooked up to squeeze money out of my client." "Thank you," Silas said, looking at the judge with a relieved smile. "You see, Your Honor, a misunderstanding of complex corporate finance." He turned to Elena. "Your witness." Elena stood up. She didn't bring her notepad this time. She walked right up to the witness stand. She looked Anthony Rossi in the eye. Rossi shifted in his seat. He had known Elena for 10 years. He used to come over for Christmas dinner. He knew she made a great lasagna. He didn't know she was the one signing his bonus checks. "Hello, Anthony," Elena said. "Mrs. Sterling?" He nodded stiffly. "Anthony, do you recall the board meeting in 2019 where the company voted to acquire the logistics hub in Texas?" "Yes, I was there." "And do you remember that the vote was tied? Marcus wanted to buy it, but the board was deadlocked." Rossi nodded. "I recall." "And how was the tie broken, Anthony?" The shadow shareholder emailed a proxy vote," Rossi said, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "Right," Elena said. "The shadow shareholder. The mysterious entity that owns 51% of the voting rights but chooses to remain anonymous. You all call this shareholder the Ghost, don't you?" "Yes," Rossi whispered. "We call him the Ghost." "Him?" Elena tilted her head. "Why do you assume it's a him?" "Because," Rossi stammered, "because only a man would have that kind of ruthless acquisition strategy." The courtroom murmured. "Anthony," Elena said, pulling a phone from her pocket, "I'm going to play a voicemail. Tell me if you recognize the voice." She held the phone up to the microphone. "Anthony, this is the Ghost. Approve the Texas deal. Marcus is too emotional, but the numbers work. Do it now or find a new job." The voice on the recording was distorted, robotic, clearly altered to hide the identity. That's the Ghost," Rossi said. "We received that call 4 years ago." "Yes, you did," Elena said. "But look at the timestamp on the original file." She handed another paper to the judge. "Exhibit B, Your Honor. The metadata from the call log." Judge Henderson looked at the paper. "The call originated from a cell phone registered to Elena Sterling?" The judge looked up, stunned. Marcus stood up, knocking his chair over. "That's impossible. You were at a spa weekend that day." "Was I?" Elena turned to her husband. "Or was I in the hotel room analyzing your quarterly reports while you were out playing golf with your mistress? You see, Marcus, you thought you married a trophy. You didn't realize you married the bank. And now the bank is calling in the loan." Silas Blackwood looked at Marcus with pure venom. "You told me she was stupid," he hissed. "You told me she didn't know anything about the business." "She doesn't," Marcus shouted, panic rising in his chest. "She's lying. She must have hacked my phone." "Mr. Rossi," Elena continued, ignoring the outburst, "since you are under oath, and since perjury carries a sentence of up to 5 years in prison, I want to ask you one more question about the company structure. Who has the power to fire the CEO? Rossi looked at Marcus, then at the furious judge, and finally at Elena. He swallowed hard. The majority shareholder," Rossi whispered. "The Ghost." "And if I prove today that I am the Ghost," Elena said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "what happens to Marcus?" Rossi trembled. He would be terminated immediately." Elena turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I am not here to ask for alimony. I am not here to ask for the house. I am here to conduct a performance review of my employee, Marcus Sterling, and I regret to inform the court that he is failing." The silence in courtroom 42 was fractured by the sound of Marcus Sterling laughing, but this time it wasn't the rich, confident laugh of a billionaire. It was the high-pitched, hysterical laugh of a man watching his reality dissolve. "This is absurd!" Marcus shouted, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at his wife. "She's a waitress! She served coffee for $3 an hour. Where would she get $5 million? She's clearly mentally unstable, Your Honor. She's forged these documents. She's living in a fantasy world. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Judge Henderson roared, slamming his gavel with enough force to rattle the water pitcher. Mr. Blackwood, control your client or I will have him removed. Silas Blackwood pulled Marcus back into his chair. Silas looked pale. The butcher of Broadway had dealt with surprises before, but never one of this magnitude. If Elena really owned the debt, she wasn't just the wife, she was the boss. But Silas knew one thing about the law. Facts don't matter as much as perception. If he could paint her as a fraud, the evidence wouldn't stick. Your Honor, Silas said, smoothing his tie, his voice regaining its icy calm. We move to strike Mrs. Sterling's entire testimony and these alleged exhibits. It is physically impossible for the petitioner to have access to such capital. We believe she has either fallen victim to a scam or is engaging in high-level identity theft. We request an immediate recess to verify the mental state of the petitioner. Denied, Judge Henderson said instantly. Mrs. Sterling has presented notarized bank records. The burden of proof has shifted to you, Mr. Blackwood. If you claim she's a fraud, prove it. Silas turned to Elena. His eyes narrowed. He looked like a wolf deciding where to bite. Very well, Silas said. I call the petitioner, Elena Sterling, to the stand. Elena walked to the witness box. She didn't look at Marcus. She looked straight ahead, her face a mask of calm determination. She took the oath. Mrs. Sterling, Silas began, walking up to her, invading her personal space. Let's cut the charade. You grew up in Queens. Your father was a bus driver. Your mother worked in a bakery. Is that correct? That is correct, Elena said. You dropped out of community college to work at the Blue Diner. You were struggling to pay rent when you met Marcus. You didn't even have a car, correct? I took the subway, Elena replied. So, Silas leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension. Tell the court, Mrs. Sterling, how does a girl from Queens who takes the subway suddenly become a multi-million-dollar angel investor in a Swiss holding company? Did you rob a bank? Or did you just find a very good printer to fake these documents? Elena looked at Silas. She waited for a beat, letting the tension build. I didn't rob a bank, Mr. Blackwood, and I didn't get the money from my father, the bus driver. I got it from my grandfather. Marcus scoffed loudly from his table. Her grandfather was a mechanic. He died broke. My maternal grandfather, Elena corrected him, her voice cutting through Marcus's outburst like a knife. You never asked about my mother's side of the family, Marcus. You were too busy talking about yourself. If you had asked, you would have known that my mother was estranged from her father. And who was this mysterious grandfather? Silas asked, rolling his eyes. Santa Claus? No, Elena said. His name was Elias Vane. The air left the room. Even Judge Henderson gasped. Silas Blackwood froze mid-step. Elias Vane wasn't just a name, he was a legend. An industrial tycoon from the steel era, a man who had built half the skyscrapers in New York before vanishing from public life in the 90s. He was worth billions, and when he died, everyone assumed his fortune had gone to charity. Elias Vane, Silas whispered. That's impossible. Vane had no heirs. He had one daughter, Elena said. My mother. She ran away when she was 18 because she hated his money. She wanted a simple life. She married a bus driver and never took a dime from him. But when Elias died 5 years ago, he left everything to his only grandchild, me. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound document. Exhibit C, Your Honor. The Vane Family Trust, executed in 2019. Total assets valued at $2.4 billion. Marcus's jaw dropped. He looked at Elena as if she were an alien. For 10 years, he had treated her like a peasant. He had made her beg for an allowance. He had criticized her spending habits. And all that time, she could have bought him and sold him 100 times over. You, Marcus stammered, you're a billionaire? Technically, Elena said coolly, I'm a multi-billionaire. And when your little startup was crashing in 2018 because you spent the seed money on sports cars, I felt sorry for you. I authorized the bridge loan through my Swiss office. I wanted to see if you could succeed if someone just gave you a chance. I wanted to believe in you, Marcus. Her eyes filled with sudden tears, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of anger. I didn't tell you because I wanted to be sure you loved me, not the Vane fortune. And what did you do? You succeeded. You built the company, but you became a monster. You cheated. You lied. And when you thought I was useless, you tried to throw me away. Silas tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He was calculating the legal fees he was about to lose. But that's not the worst part, is it, Marcus? Elena wiped her eyes and her voice hardened again. Because being an unfaithful husband isn't a crime, but violating the shareholder agreement, that is. What are you talking about? Marcus snapped, finding his voice again. I am the CEO. I run the company. Not anymore, Elena said. The terms of the Nemesis Ventures loan were very specific. Section 4, paragraph 2. If the CEO engages in any illegal activity that jeopardizes the company's reputation, the majority shareholder has the right to dissolve the board and assume immediate executive control. I haven't done anything illegal, Marcus screamed. I am a legitimate businessman. Are you? Elena turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to introduce Exhibit D. It's a series of emails between Marcus Sterling and a contractor named Orion Construction. Silas Blackwood finally moved. He lunged toward the bench. Objection! Privileged communication! It's not privileged if it's on the company server that I own, Elena shot back. Judge, these emails show that Marcus paid Orion Construction $12 million to build a warehouse that doesn't exist. The address is an empty lot in New Jersey. And who owns Orion Construction? She didn't wait for an answer. She pointed to the back of the room, directly at the blonde woman who had been trying to sneak out since the name Elias Vane was mentioned. Tiffany Miller, Elena announced. His mistress. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were furiously typing. Tiffany Miller froze near the exit, her face pale. He was embezzling company funds, Elena continued, her voice rising over the chaos. He was stealing from the company, my company, to buy penthouses and jewelry for his girlfriend. He was laundering money from the Vane Trust into his mistress's pocket. That is embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. Judge Henderson looked at the exhibits. His face was grim. He looked up at Marcus Sterling. Mr. Sterling, is this true? Did you authorize these transfers? Marcus looked at Silas. Fix this, he hissed. Do something. Silas Blackwood stepped away from his client. He physically took a step back, creating distance. Your Honor, Silas said, his voice devoid of emotion. I was not aware of these transactions. If my client has engaged in criminal enterprise, I cannot represent him regarding those matters. You coward, Marcus yelled, grabbing Silas by the arm. You knew. You set up the shell company. Allegedly, Silas said, pulling his arm away and dusting off his suit. I advise you to exercise your right to remain silent, Mr. Sterling. I am withdrawing from this case, effective immediately. You can't leave me, Marcus screamed. He looked around the room. The gallery was staring at him with disgust. The judge looked ready to issue an arrest warrant, and Elena was just watching him. She wasn't smiling anymore. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had just put down a sick animal. Mrs. Sterling, Judge Henderson said, given the evidence of massive corporate theft and the violation of the shareholder agreement, the court is prepared to grant your motion. But I must ask, what is your intention? Do you want to liquidate the company to recover your losses? Elena looked at the employees sitting in the back, the few loyal ones who had come to support Marcus, now looking betrayed and terrified for their jobs. No, Your Honor, Elena said. Sterling Global employs 4,000 people. They didn't steal anything. They shouldn't be punished for Marcus's greed. She stood up straighter, channeling the energy of her grandfather, the steel tycoon. I am activating the hostile takeover clause, Elena declared. I am removing Marcus Sterling as CEO, effective this second. I am freezing his assets to recover the stolen funds, and I am appointing myself as the interim chairwoman of the board. You? Marcus laughed, a broken, desperate sound. You don't know how to run a logistics company. You'll run it into the ground in a week. You're just a waitress. Elena walked over to her table and picked up her phone. She pressed a button. The large screens in the courtroom flickered to life. It was a live feed of the Sterling Global headquarters. Actually, Marcus, Elena said, while you were laughing at my dress, I was texting the board of directors. They've already voted. Look, on the screen, security guards were seen entering the executive suite. They were taking Marcus's nameplate off the door. They were escorting Tiffany Miller's terrified assistants out of the building. I spent the last 10 years listening to you talk business at dinner, Marcus, Elena said softly, so only he could hear. I learned everything not to do. I learned that arrogance kills profit. I learned that greed kills loyalty. You were the best teacher I could have asked for. The doors to the courtroom banged open again. But this time, it wasn't the FBI. It was worse. It was the press. A horde of cameras and microphones crowded the entrance, held back by bailiffs. They had smelled the blood in the water. The headline was already writing itself. Mystery billionaire wife ousts CEO husband. Judge Henderson banged his gavel. Judgment is entered in favor of the petitioner. The court grants full control of Sterling Global to Elena Sterling. Mr. Sterling, you are ordered to surrender your passport immediately pending a federal investigation into the embezzlement charges. Marcus slumped into his chair. It was over. The money, the status, the power, it was all gone. He looked up at Elena, searching for a trace of the woman who used to look at him with adoration. Elena, he whispered, his voice cracking. Please, we can work this out. I still love you. Elena looked down at him. She didn't feel hate. She didn't feel love. She felt nothing. You don't love me, Marcus, she said. You loved the fact that I was small, so you could feel big. But you forgot one thing about small people. What? Marcus asked, tears streaming down his face. We fit into places you can't, Elena said, like the vents, or the payroll system, or the ownership trust. She turned her back on him and walked toward the exit. The reporters started shouting questions. Mrs. Sterling, is it true you're the vain heiress? Mrs. Sterling, what's your first move as CEO? Elena stopped at the door. She looked back one last time at the man who had called her a charity case. My first move? Elena said to the cameras, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. I'm going to give everyone a raise, except the executives. They're all fired. The transition from the courtroom to the boardroom was a journey of only 20 city blocks, but for Elena Sterling, it felt like crossing a different kind of border. She sat in the back of a black town car, watching the New York skyline blur past. Her phone was buzzing incessantly with calls from CNN, Fox Business, and the Wall Street Journal. But she ignored them all. She wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in the infestation at the top of Sterling Global. She knew that Marcus was just the face of the corruption. The roots went much deeper, tangled into a board of directors that had treated the company like their personal piggy bank for a decade. The car pulled up to the gleaming glass skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The logo of Sterling Global, a silver globe held by a titan, was etched in steel above the revolving doors. Elena stepped out. She hadn't changed clothes. She was still wearing the simple navy dress Marcus had mocked. But as she walked through the lobby, the atmosphere was electric with fear. Employees huddled in corners, whispering. They had seen the news. They knew the FBI had raided Marcus's penthouse. They knew the waitress was now the owner. When she reached the executive floor on the 42nd level, the reception area was abandoned. The receptionist, a woman named Chloe, who had formerly refused to even validate Elena's parking ticket, had fled. Elena walked straight to the double mahogany doors of the boardroom. She could hear shouting from inside. She didn't knock. She pushed the doors open with both hands. Around the massive oval table sat 12 men and 1 woman, the board of directors. They were in chaos. Ties loosened, sleeves rolled up, shredding documents and yelling into phones. The room went silent as Elena entered. The silence wasn't respectful. It was hostile. Who let you in? Barked Conrad Vance, the chairman of the board. Vance was a 70-year-old corporate raider with a reputation for stripping companies for parts. He looked at Elena as if she were a delivery girl who had walked into a surgery. Security! Get this woman out of here! This is a restricted meeting. Sit down, Conrad, Elena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. Vance scoffed, his face turning red. Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I built this board. Go home and bake cookies, Elena. Your husband might be in handcuffs, but this company is under our control now. We are filing an injunction to block your hostile takeover. You have no experience. You're a housewife. Elena walked to the head of the table, Marcus's empty chair. She didn't sit. She stood behind it, placing her hands on the leather backrest, looking down at them. Actually, she said, pulling the court order from her bag and sliding it down the polished table. It's under mine. Judge Henderson granted me emergency conservatorship over the voting shares. That makes me the chairwoman. And as my first act, I am calling this meeting to order. We won't stand for this, said another board member, a heavyset man named Baxter, who was sweating profusely. The stock is down 40% in 2 hours. We need to sell the logistics division to Amazon by the end of the day to save the capital. We are authorizing the sale right now. No, Elena said. What do you mean, no? Baxter stood up, trying to use his size to intimidate her. You don't understand business, little girl. We have a liquidity crisis. We have a corruption crisis, Elena shot back, and we are not selling the logistics division. That division employs 4,000 people in Ohio and Michigan. If you sell it, they lose their pensions because of the way Marcus structured the debt. I read the contracts, Baxter. The room fell silent again. They were looking at her differently now, not with respect, but with caution, like a group of hyenas realizing the lioness is awake. So, what is your brilliant plan? Vance sneered. Hug the employees until the stock recovers? Use your grandfather's money to bail us out? No, Elena said. My plan is to cut the cancer out. She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of manila folders. She tossed one in front of Vance, one in front of Baxter, and one in front of the female board member, Linda Gray. What is this? Linda asked, opening the folder with trembling fingers. That, Elena said, is a record of the kickbacks you three received from the Nevada warehouse project. You approved a bid that was 20% higher than the market rate. And coincidentally, the construction company is owned by your brother-in-law, Linda. Linda went pale. She shut the folder. Elena turned to Vance. And you, Conrad, you've been short-selling sterling stock for 3 months. You knew Marcus was cooking the books. You were betting against the company you were supposed to be protecting. You were planning to bankrupt us and buy the scraps for pennies on the dollar. Vance slammed his hand on the table. This is slander. Where did you get this? Did you bug the room? I didn't have to, Elena said. Marcus kept everything. He didn't trust you any more than you trusted him. He kept a digital insurance policy. And since I own the servers now, I own your secrets. She leaned forward, gripping the chair until her knuckles turned white. Here is how this is going to work. Vance, Baxter, Gray, you are resigning, effective immediately. You will cite personal health reasons. If you do, I won't hand these folders to the SEC agents who are currently downstairs seizing the hard drives. If you fight me, you will share a cell with Marcus. Vance looked at the other board members. They looked away. He was alone. You're a witch, Vance hissed, grabbing his coat. I'm a wife who paid attention, Elena replied. Get out. Vance stormed out, followed closely by Baxter and Gray, who wouldn't meet Elena's eyes. The remaining 9 board members sat perfectly still, terrified. Now, Elena said, finally sitting in the leather chair. It was too big for her, but she filled the room with her presence. Let's talk about how we're going to fix the pension fund. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the time the sun set over Manhattan, Elena had stabilized the immediate crisis. She had appointed an interim CFO, issued a press release calming the shareholders, and personally emailed the entire staff promising no layoffs. It was 8 p.m. when she finally found herself alone in the executive suite. The cleaners had long since departed, leaving the office in a heavy, pressurized silence. Elena walked into Marcus's private office. It was a shrine to his ego. Awards on the shelves, photos of him shaking hands with politicians, a humidor of Cuban cigars. She felt a wave of nausea. This was the room where he had betrayed her 1,000 times. But she wasn't here to reminisce. She was here for the safe. During the trial, Marcus had mentioned a digital insurance policy to Silas, but Elena knew Marcus. He was old-fashioned in his paranoia. He didn't trust the cloud with the things that could truly destroy him. He kept a physical backup. She walked to the large painting of a 19th century schooner on the north wall. She remembered Marcus once bragging, drunk on scotch, that he kept his real life behind that ship. She removed the painting. Behind it was a steel wall safe. She stared at the keypad. She tried his birthday. Error. She tried their anniversary. Error. She tried Tiffany's birthday. Error. Elena closed her eyes. She thought about the man Marcus really was, narcissistic, obsessed with his own legend. The day he became CEO, June 12, 2014. She typed 061214. Click. The heavy steel door swung open. There was no cash inside, just a stack of old hard drives and a single, weather-beaten notebook bound in red leather. It looked out of place among the high-tech gadgets. It looked old. Elena took the notebook to the desk and clicked on the brass reading lamp. She opened the cover. It wasn't a ledger. It was a diary, but not Marcus's. The handwriting was jagged, sharp. It belonged to Silas Blackwood. It was a log of cleanup operations for Sterling Global. It cataloged bribes to union leaders, illegal chemical dumpings in the Hudson River, and blackmail schemes against rivals going back 20 years. But as she flipped to the entries from 2014, the year she met Marcus, her blood ran cold. Entry, May 4th, 2014. 2014. Target identified: Frank Russo, bus driver, union steward. He is organizing a strike that will halt the merger. He refuses the payout. He claims he has proof of the safety violations on the new fleet. Elena's hands began to tremble. Frank Russo was her father. He hadn't died of a heart attack, as the police report said. He had died in a tragic mugging gone wrong in a parking lot. She turned the page, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Entry: May 15th, 2014. Problem solved. The obstacle has been removed. No witnesses. Police report filed as random violence. Detective O'Malley paid in full. Entry: June 1st, 2014. Complication: the daughter, Elena, is asking questions. She wants to see the autopsy report. She is persistent. Marcus suggests a different approach. If we cannot buy her silence, perhaps we can marry it. She is vulnerable. She is broke. If she becomes a Sterling, she can never testify against the family interest. Elena gasped. A ragged sound in the empty room. She dropped the book, the romance, the flowers. The way Marcus had accidentally bumped into her at the diner a month after her father's funeral. It was never love. It was never even about her looks. It was a containment strategy. They had murdered her father to stop a strike, and then Marcus had married her to keep her close, to monitor her, to make sure she never found out the truth about the safety violations her father died protecting. She wasn't just a trophy wife. She was a hostage. A cold rage, deeper and darker than anything she had felt in the courtroom, flooded her veins. This wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about the company. This was blood. Buzz. The intercom on her desk jolted her so hard she nearly knocked over the lamp. Mrs. Sterling? The night security guard's voice crackled. Mr. Blackwood is here. He says he has urgent papers regarding Marcus's plea deal that you need to sign before morning. Elena stared at the intercom, paralyzed. Silas Blackwood. The man who wrote the diary. The man who called her father an obstacle. Send him up, she whispered, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. She had seconds. She shoved the red notebook into her purse. She looked around for a weapon. There was a letter opener on the desk, heavy, brass, sharp. She slid it under the file folder in front of her. She took out her phone and hit record on the voice memo app, sliding it face down on the desk. The elevator chimed down the hall. The sound was deafening in the quiet building. Silas Blackwood walked in. He wasn't the polished lawyer from this morning. He wore a dark trench coat, his collar turned up. His eyes were rimmed with red, looking like a man who had stared into the abyss and blinked. He didn't have any papers in his hands. Working late, Elena? Silas said, closing the heavy oak door behind him. He reached out and clicked the lock. What do you want, Silas? Elena asked. She stayed behind the desk, her fingers inching toward the hidden blade. I'm here to save you, Silas lied, walking toward the wet bar in the corner. He poured himself a scotch, his hand steady. Marcus is cracking in custody. He's going to trade everyone to the feds to get a lighter sentence. Me, the board, you. I haven't done anything wrong, Elena said, watching him like a hawk. It doesn't matter, Silas smiled, a cold, reptilian expression. He walked around the desk, invading her space. I need leverage. I need the insurance policy, Elena. I know Marcus kept a backup, and I know you found the safe. He stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at the empty painting frame on the wall. He looked at the open safe. Give me the book, Elena, Silas said, his voice dropping to a growl. You don't know what you're holding. That book burns down the whole city. I know exactly what it is, Elena said, standing up. It's a confession. You killed my father. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Silas didn't deny it. He took a sip of his drink, looking bored. Frank was a problem, he said simply. We removed him, and you got a life of luxury in exchange. Was it really such a bad trade? You are a monster, Elena whispered. I am a pragmatist, Silas corrected her. He set the glass down. Now, give me the book. If the DOJ gets that, it's a murder charge. I won't go down alone. I'll make sure you go down with me. I'll plant evidence that you knew, that you spent the blood money. He held out his hand. The book, now. Elena looked at the door. It was locked. She looked at Silas. He was bigger, stronger, and desperate. But she was the daughter of Frank Russo, and she was the granddaughter of Elias Vane. Okay, she said, reaching into her purse. You win. She pulled out the red notebook. Silas's eyes lit up with greed. He reached for it. Elena tossed the book high into the air over his head. Silas's instinct took over. He spun around ground, lunging to catch the evidence before it hit the floor. In that split second, Elena grabbed the heavy brass letter opener and the can of pepper spray she had started carrying since the divorce began. She didn't run, she attacked. The hiss of the pepper spray was the loudest sound in the world. A stream of burning orange liquid hit Silas Blackwood directly in the eyes. He didn't just scream, he roared. A guttural, primal sound of shock and agony. He stumbled backward, clawing at his face, crashing blindly into the wet bar. Crystal decanters shattered, sending shards of glass and expensive scotch exploding across the floor. Elena didn't hesitate. In the split second that Silas was incapacitated, she didn't run for the door. She dove for the red notebook that had landed on the Persian rug. She snatched it up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a sledgehammer. "You bitch!" Silas screamed, swinging a heavy fist blindly through the air. "I'll kill you! I'll kill you with my bare hands!" Elena scrambled to her feet. She bolted for the heavy oak door. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the lock. Click! She twisted the deadbolt. Thud! Silas slammed his body against the desk behind her. Disoriented but finding his bearings, he could hear her. He was hunting by sound. Elena ripped the door open and threw herself into the hallway, slamming it shut behind her. She didn't have time to lock it from the outside. She kicked off her high heels. They were too loud, too slow, and sprinted in her stocking feet down the long, carpeted corridor toward the elevators. She jammed the call button. Come on, come on. Behind her, the door to the executive office burst open. Silas Blackwood stumbled into the hallway. He looked like a nightmare. His face was swollen and bright red, his eyes streaming tears, his teeth bared in a rictus of hate. In his right hand, he gripped a jagged shard of the broken scotch bottle, a makeshift glass dagger that gleamed under the emergency lights. "You can't run, Elena," he wheezed, wiping his eyes with his sleeve, trying to clear his vision. "I own this building's security. I'll shut off the power. You're dead!" The elevator chimed. Finally. The doors slid open with agonizing slowness. Elena threw herself inside and smashed the lobby button repeatedly. "I see you!" Silas yelled. He broke into a run, limping but fast, fueled by adrenaline and rage. He was 20 feet away, 10 feet. Elena pressed herself against the back wall of the elevator, clutching the red notebook to her chest as if it could stop a knife. Silas lunged, slashing the air with the glass shard. The steel doors slid shut just inches from his face. Thump! Elena heard his body collide with the metal doors as the elevator began its smooth, silent descent. She slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor. She was gasping for air, her lungs burning. She looked at the floor indicator numbers counting down. 40, 39, 38. She wasn't safe. She knew Silas. He wouldn't wait for the next elevator. He would take the emergency stairs. He would call the night security, men on his payroll, not hers. She pulled out her phone to call 911. No signal. The elevator shaft was a dead zone. She was trapped in a steel box, descending into a trap. She looked at the red notebook. This wasn't just evidence of a murder. It was the leverage Silas needed to stay out of prison. He wasn't trying to get it back to hide it anymore. He was going to destroy it, and her along with it. If she died tonight, he would frame it as a suicide. Grieving widow jumps from balcony. It was too clean. It was exactly how he operated. Ding! The elevator opened onto the lobby. The massive atrium of Sterling Global was usually a place of light and activity, but at night it was a cavern of shadows. The marble floors reflected the moonlight streaming in through the 3-story glass windows. It was silent as a tomb. Elena stepped out, her eyes darting around. The security desk was empty. The night guard who had called her earlier was gone, dismissed by Silas, no doubt. She sprinted toward the main entrance, the revolving glass doors that led to the safety of the street. She could see the taxis passing by outside, the life of the city just a few yards away. She pushed against the glass. It didn't move. She pushed harder. Nothing. "No," she whispered. Panic rose in her throat like bile. She looked at the security panel on the wall. A red light was blinking. System lockdown. Silas hadn't lied. He had triggered the building's night containment protocol from his phone before he even entered her office. The magnetic locks were engaged. Steel shutters were beginning to descend over the side exits. She was locked in. "Elena!" The voice drifted down from the mezzanine balcony above the lobby. It echoed off the marble walls, distorted and ghostly. Elena spun around, backing away from the doors. She looked up. Silas was standing on the railing of the second floor, looking down at her. He had taken the stairs, cutting off her escape. He looked calm now, terrifyingly calm. He was wiping the blood from his hand onto his trench coat. "The police response time in Midtown is 7 minutes, Silas called down, his voice echoing in the vast space. "But the phone lines in the lobby are cut, and cell service is jammed by the security system. No one is coming, Elena." He began to walk toward the stairs, stairs that led down to the lobby floor. Step, step, step. The sound of his dress shoes on the marble was rhythmic, like a ticking clock. "You have two choices," Silas said, descending slowly. "You give me the book, and I make it quick. A painless overdose. You go to sleep and wake up with your father." He reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped, blocking her path to the security office. "Or," he continued, raising the glass shard, "you make me chase you. And if I have to chase you, Elena, I promise you, it will hurt." Elena looked around desperately. She was cornered. Behind her were the locked doors. In front of her was a killer. To her right was the reception desk. To her left, the decorative water fountain and the Hall of Industry, a maze of glass display cases showing the history of the company. She looked at Silas. "You forgot one thing, Silas," she said, her voice trembling but loud. "And what is that?" he sneered, stepping closer. "I grew up in Queens," she said. "We don't run from bullies. We hit back." Elena didn't wait for him to attack. She turned and threw the red notebook, not at him, but across the room, sliding it across the polished floor toward the Hall of Industry. Silas's eyes snapped to the book. It was instinct. That book was his life. "Go get it, dog!" Elena screamed. As Silas hesitated, torn between attacking her and securing the evidence, Elena bolted toward the security desk. She didn't have a weapon, but she knew something Silas didn't. She knew the building's layout better than the architect. Because for 10 years, while Marcus and Silas were drinking scotch in the penthouse, Elena had been befriending the janitors. She knew where they kept the emergency override keys. Silas roared in frustration and sprinted after the book. He scooped it up, checking to make sure it was intact, and then turned his predatory gaze back to Elena. "Bad move, Elena," he yelled, stalking toward the desk where she was frantically searching drawers. "Now I have the book, and I still have you. Come and get me," Elena whispered, her hand closing around a cold, heavy object in the bottom drawer. It wasn't a gun. It was a heavy-duty industrial taser kept by the head of security for extreme, non-lethal situations. She flipped the safety off. The device hummed with electric potential. Silas rounded the corner of the desk, the glass dagger raised high. He lunged. Elena spun around and pulled the trigger. The sound of the taser discharging was a sharp, crackling snap that echoed through the marble lobby like a whip crack. Two barbed probes shot out from the device, trailing thin copper wires, and impacted squarely in the center of Silas Blackwood's chest, punching through his expensive trench coat and embedding themselves in his skin. 50,000 volts of electricity surged through the body of the butcher of Broadway. Silas's scream was cut short as his muscles seized instantly. The glass shard flew from his hand, skittering uselessly across the floor. His eyes rolled back, his jaw clamped shut, and he collapsed backward. He hit the marble floor with a sickening, heavy thud, his body convulsing uncontrollably as the current overrode his nervous system. Elena held the trigger down for the full 5-second cycle. She watched the man who had ordered her father's murder, the man who had terrified New York's corporate elite for decades, writhing on the ground like a pinned insect. She released the trigger. The crackling stopped. Silas lay gasping on the floor, groaning, his limbs twitching. He tried to push himself up, but his arms collapsed under his own weight. He looked up at Elena. His arrogance was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated shock. Elena stepped out from behind the security desk. She was still barefoot, her breathing ragged, her dress torn at the shoulder, but she looked like a warrior queen standing over a fallen dragon. She kicked the glass shard far out of his reach. "You," Silas wheezed, spit dripping from his chin. "You stupid girl." "I'm not a girl, Silas," Elena said, her voice trembling with adrenaline but clear as a bell. "I'm the CEO, and you are trespassing." She looked down at the industrial taser in her hand, then back at him. "And just so we're clear on the HR policy, you're fired." Crash! The sound of shattering glass exploded behind her for the second time that night. But this wasn't a desperate woman trying to escape. This was a battering ram. The main revolving doors of the Sterling Global lobby disintegrated inward as an armored SWAT truck smashed through the entrance, showering the lobby with safety glass. Tires screeched on the marble as the vehicle skidded to a halt. Bright white tactical lights blinded them. Red laser sights cut through the dust and debris, dancing across Silas's Silas's prone form. "Federal agents! Drop the weapon! Down on the ground! Now!" Men in heavy tactical gear swarmed into the lobby like a colony of ants, rifles raised. They weren't just police. The yellow lettering on their raid jackets read FBI. Elena dropped the taser immediately and raised her hands. "Don't shoot!" she yelled. "He's down! The target is down!" A woman in a Kevlar vest pushed through the line of SWAT officers. She had a stern face and walked with authority. It was Special Agent Miller, the head of the DOJ's Corporate Crimes Division. She lowered her weapon when she saw Elena. "Secure the suspect," Miller barked. 4 agents descended on Silas. They hauled him up roughly, twisting his arms behind his back. Silas screamed in pain, but the agents ignored him, slapping heavy steel cuffs on his wrists tight. "Silas Blackwood," Agent Miller announced, her voice echoing in the ruined lobby. "You are under arrest for the murder of Frank Russo, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and obstruction of justice." Silas, dazed and bleeding, looked wildly between the agents and Elena. "Murder? You have no proof. It's her word against mine. She assaulted me. Look at me." Agent Miller walked over to the security desk. She picked up Elena's phone, which was lying face down where Elena had slid it earlier. The screen was cracked, but the recording light was still blinking red. "We heard everything, Mr. Blackwood," Agent Miller said, holding up the phone. "Mrs. Sterling started a live voice transmission to my office 10 minutes ago. We heard you confess to killing Frank Russo. We heard you threaten to kill her. We heard it all in high definition." Silas's face went white. The blood drained from his features so completely he looked like a corpse. He realized then that the waitress hadn't just outfought him, she had outsmarted him. She had used his own arrogance as the bait. "Take him away," Miller ordered with disgust. As the agents dragged Silas toward the shattered entrance, he didn't fight. He slumped, his legs dragging on the floor, a broken man. As he passed Elena, he didn't look at her with hate anymore. He looked at her with fear. Elena watched him go. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her knees weak. She leaned against the desk to steady herself. "Mrs. Sterling?" Agent Miller approached her gently. "Are you injured? Do you need a medic?" Elena shook her head slowly. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm okay." "You did good," Miller said, a rare smile touching her lips. "We've been trying to nail Blackwood for 15 years. He always covered his tracks. We never had the smoking gun." Elena reached down to the floor where Silas had dropped his prize. She picked up the red leather notebook. It was scuffed and dusty, but intact. She handed it to the agent. "Here," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "Here is the gun and the bullets and the bodies." Agent Miller took the book reverently. She opened it to the first page, saw the handwriting, and nodded. "This puts him away for life, and Marcus, too." "Marcus?" Elena asked. "Marcus Sterling was arrested at the airport an hour ago," Miller confirmed. "He was trying to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. He claimed he knew nothing about the murder, but, well, I guess we'll see what this book says about that." Elena looked out the shattered windows. The sun was just beginning to rise over New York City, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. The long night was finally over. "It's over, Elena," Miller said softly. "Your father can rest now." Elena walked toward the light. She stepped through the broken glass, past the police cars, past the ambulances. She felt the cool morning air on her face. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in 10 years, the air didn't taste like ash. It tasted like freedom. But the story wasn't quite finished. There was one more thing she had to do, one more wrong to right. Because Silas and Marcus hadn't just stolen her father's life, they had stolen the livelihoods of thousands of workers to build their empire, and Elena Sterling, or rather, Elena Russo, had a company to run. 6 months later, the fall of the Sterling Empire was absolute. It was the kind of scandal that documentaries are made of. The Red Notebook provided enough evidence to indict over 50 people, from corrupt union leaders to high-ranking city officials. Silas Blackwood, stripped of his immunity and abandoned by his powerful friends, was charged with first-degree murder. Faced with the audio recording of his confession and the physical evidence from the notebook, the Butcher of Broadway didn't even go to trial. He pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He is currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security federal supermax in Colorado. He spends 23 hours a day in a concrete cell, with no expensive suits and no scotch. Marcus Sterling tried to fight. He hired a new team of lawyers, claiming he was a victim of Silas's manipulation. But the jury didn't buy it. The emails regarding the embezzlement were too damning. He was convicted of 30 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The judge, a different one this time, as Judge Henderson had recused himself to testify against him, was merciless. Marcus was sentenced to 25 years. As he was led away in handcuffs, wearing a generic orange jumpsuit instead of his charcoal suit, he looked into the gallery. He wasn't looking for Tiffany Miller. She had already testified against him in exchange for probation. He was looking for Elena. But Elena wasn't there. She had better things to do. On a crisp autumn morning, the wind sweeping leaves across the pavement, Elena stood at the head of the Sterling Global boardroom table. The room had changed. The pretentiousness was gone. The expensive abstract art had been replaced by photos of the company's founding fleet. And the people sitting in the leather chairs weren't corporate raiders or hedge fund managers. To Elena's right sat Maria, the head of the custodial staff. To her left was Dave, a forklift operator from the Ohio branch. Around the table sat truck drivers, shift managers, and administrative assistants. "Thank you all for coming," Elena said, her voice steady and commanding. She looked different now. The sensible bun was gone, her hair loose and wavy. She wore a tailored suit, not to show off wealth, but to show respect for the job. "I called this meeting to announce the final restructuring of the Vane Family Trust's involvement in this company," Elena began. The room went quiet. They were nervous. They knew Elena had saved them from immediate bankruptcy, but they feared she would eventually sell the company for a profit. That's what billionaires did. Elena picked up a stack of documents. "My grandfather, Elias Vane, built his fortune on steel, but he died alone because he valued profit over people. My husband, Marcus, built this company on lies because he valued status over integrity. I don't want to be like either of them." She slid the documents across the table to Maria and Dave. "These are the transfer deeds," Elena said. "Effective today, Sterling Global is no longer a privately held corporation. It is now an employee-owned cooperative." Gasps filled the room. Dave picked up the paper, his hands stained with grease, reading the fine print in disbelief. You're giving us the shares?" Dave asked, his voice choking up. "I'm keeping 10% to maintain a voting interest on the board," Elena explained. "The other 90% belongs to you, the drivers, the packers, the cleaners. You built this company. You kept it running while Marcus was stealing from the pension fund. The profits don't go to the Cayman Islands anymore. They go into your paychecks and your retirement." Maria started to cry, covering her mouth with her hand. "Mrs. Sterling, I don't know what to say." "Call me Elena," she smiled. "And don't thank me. Just promise me one thing. Don't let the sharks back in." "Never," Dave said, slamming his fist on the table, a grin spreading across his face. "We'll run a tight ship, Elena. We promise." Elena walked out of the building an hour later, leaving behind the sound of cheering and champagne popping. Cheap champagne, drank out of plastic cups, which tasted better than any vintage Dom Perignon Marcus had ever bought. She got into her car, but she didn't drive to a penthouse. She drove out of the city, crossing the bridge into New Jersey. She drove past the old diner where she used to work, past the small apartment complex where she grew up, until she reached a quiet cemetery on a hill overlooking the skyline. She walked through the rows of headstones until she found it, a simple gray marker tended to with care. Giovanni Frank Russo, beloved father, Union man. Elena knelt in the grass. She placed a copy of the court order on the grave, right next to a bouquet of white lilies. "I got it back, Papa," she whispered, the wind carrying her words away. "I got the pension fund back. I got the dignity back. And the men who hurt you, they're never going to hurt anyone else again." She traced the letters of his name with her fingers. For 10 years, she had carried the weight of his death, the guilt of marrying the man associated with it, the fear of the truth. Now, the weight was gone. "I'm not a Sterling anymore," she told the stone. "And I'm not just a Vane. I'm a Russo. And we don't run." Elena stood up, wiping a single tear from her cheek. She looked back at the city in the distance. It looked different now. It didn't look like a fortress she couldn't enter. It looked like a place full of opportunities. They say that revenge is a dish best served cold. But Elena proved that justice isn't about revenge. It's about balance. Marcus and Silas thought they were untouchable because they had money and power. They laughed at Elena because she was just a waitress. But they forgot the most important rule of the jungle. You never, ever corner a survivor. Because when you strip someone of everything they have, you leave them with the only thing that matters, the truth. And the truth truth has a way of burning everything down. Elena got into her car and drove away, leaving the graveyard silent. She had a board meeting at 9, and she didn't want to be late. After all, she was the boss. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, identity, and ultimate justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a drama. And tell me in the comments below, do you think 25 years in prison was enough for Marcus? Or should he have gotten life like Silas? I'll be reading your answers. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.